Good afternoon. Welcome to our seminar, online seminar today, discussing the impact of the transatlantic relations and of the second Trump presidency on Southeastern Europe. I welcome you on behalf of the Südosteuropa-Gesellschaft as a member of the Presidium and the moderator. My name is Florian Bieber, and I will be moderating the session over the next 90 minutes. I will be briefly introducing our panelists, but let me briefly first outline some of the key themes we hope to explore in the next hour and a half in our conversation. It is not just the policies of the Trump administration for the Western Balkans and what it entails specifically for the countries of the region. It's also what the crisis of transatlantic relations between the European Union and Europe at large and North America and the United States in particular means for the Western Balkans. We're also going to be exploring questions pertaining to the severe cuts the US administration has made to assistance, not globally, but in particularly for projects in the Western Balkans and what it means. And then we will look at more the indirect effects, the effects of what a Trump administration means in terms of emulation, in terms of a model or a way of doing business for governments across Southeastern Europe. So to discuss these questions, I'm very glad that we have a great panel today. We have Peter Beyer, who is a member of the Bundestag for the CDU-CSU. He was the government coordinator for transatlantic relations, which reflects his long-standing interest and very good relations to the United States and observing this relationship very thoroughly. But he's also linked to Southeastern Europe as the vice president of the Südosteuropa-Gesellschaft. Second speaker is Ćerimagić, who many of you know as the senior analyst of the European Stability Initiative, following again issues of European integration of the Western Balkans for many years. Then we have Vukosava Crnjanski, who is the director of CRTA, which is a very important organization in Serbia involved in questions of democracy, election monitoring, and involved in a number of issues pertaining to democracy and rule of law in Serbia. Then we have Manuel Sarrazin, who is not just well known to the audience as president of the Südosteuropa-Gesellschaft, but he's also the former special representative of the German government for the countries of the Western Balkans and has been thus following the region very closely also on the diplomatic level in recent years. And the last speaker who will be joining us shortly is Valbona Zeneli, who is a senior non-resident fellow of the Atlantic Council, and as a result follows Euro-Atlantic relations very carefully from an American perspective, and she will be sharing her views. So to the procedure, we will have first all of our speakers sharing their insights on what they consider to be the most important impact of the second Trump presidency so far on the Western Balkans. And then afterwards, we will do a second round where I will be directing specific questions to all of our panelists. And then afterwards, I would like to open the floor to discussion, a conversation. You are all able to contribute in the Q&A option where you can ask questions. You can ask questions to any of our panelists or all of them. I will pick up the questions and group them. So please don't expect that I will go in the order. Be patient. I will try to pose as many of the questions as is possible to our 5 distinguished panelists. So this is the procedure. So to start our conversation, I would first give Peter Beyer the floor and get his take on transatlantic relations and the Western Balkans. Peter, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Florian. Thanks for my dear and esteemed co-panelists, and thanks everybody for joining us this early evening. Greetings from Berlin. The topic is with a question mark, America's withdrawal from the Western Balkans, question mark. So it doesn't seem to be so sure in what regard might there be a withdrawal of the US from the Western Balkans, yes or no? I think we can say that we have evidence already that there is a withdrawal, a retraction of US official engagement in the region. Let me just briefly define what I personally would understand as the Western Balkans. I think everybody could agree that we are talking about the Western Balkans, 6 countries, at least that's my understanding. And that's what I try to concentrate on now. I've only very recently been in Washington, D.C., just 1.5 weeks ago. Led a lot of political talks there with the new administration. By the way, it was for me the first visit to DC to meet with representatives of the new Trump administration. Quite frankly, in the State Department and the National Security Council, for example, there are still a lot of vacancies. So for me, it is a little bit difficult to verify, if you so will, how solid politics and policies that were shared with me, and I would come back to this in a second, are really when we talk about the Western Balkans, but also other regions, because many of the personnel that are currently in the State Department, which by the way is cut by many, many billions of US dollars in budget, so they're undergoing a reconstruction or reorganization, as they refer to it. How fundamental the politics currently are. There's a lot of acting personnel there. So if you meet with the Western Balkans team, for example, good people, but you don't know if they will be there in like half a year or so. But anyway, just to share this anecdotically with you, because it sheds some light on how the sentiment and how the practical politics are done in the new administration currently is. The meeting started off with, well, Peter, you certainly have already noticed that we have a change in politics, in US politics in the Western Balkans. So trying to play naively, I said, what do you mean concretely? There was a little bit of hesitation, but I think we all understand and see what's happening. If you just look, for example, to some of the open positions or vacant positions in some of the Western Balkans countries with regard to ambassadors, for example, Bosnia and Herzegovina and other countries in the region, there are vacancies, which is not completely unusual after the change of an administration, but it has an effect, and I'm not sure what top personnel ambassadors in the 6 countries we will see in the near future, or if some of them will remain vacant, if we will see a hawkish approach, or well, we stay out. If we just stick for a second to BiH or Bosnia and Herzegovina, my personal observation is that Milorad Dodik might have expected a change in his favor and under the Trump administration, but we saw public statements, tweets, for example, by Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who are going in the contrary direction, sending out signals of, Mr. Dodik, we are watching you. We will keep up sanctions. Then we will not lift them. We will be tough. We'll be tough on you. And then you have the High Representative, who, in concert with the Americans, are still very closely cooperating. So that is something that needs close observation, because it's very relevant. If you go from Sarajevo, then across the border to Belgrade, and you see that this axis, Banja Luka, Belgrade, and Russia is still, very active. Just a couple of days back, you see that President Alexander Vučić has visited or attended the parade in Moscow. Yes, maybe not first row, but second or third, but Alex went there. And, I think the European Union, and I will come back to that in a minute, should in some way or another speak up and slap his fingers. If a candidate with whom we are negotiating already is on his way, a candidate country is on his way into the European Union, there needs to be conditions, there needs to be cut off of ties and bonds with Moscow, for example, and clear public statements and signals of that beyond rhetorics when you meet with, for example, Alexander Vučić, that there needs to be a solid track record of serious commitment to European values, interests, and fulfilling of conditions. Back to the United States of America, we all have had to witness, if you so will, the cut of USAID, which is very important, which also had an immediate effect on a lot of projects in the Western Balkans countries, and which basically stand there without any financing anymore. So this is the de facto stop of a lot of very good projects with regard to NGO, civil society, rule of law, facilitating of democratic structures, projects that are put to an end more or less overnight. This is a very concrete and immediate effect that we all can see. I don't want to go through all these things, but if we just briefly or for a moment come to the European Union, what does that all mean for us? First of all, I think, well, yes, United States have a new president, second time around the same guy in the Oval Office. We know him, how transactional politics he does. Some of his personnel we know, some not. It's very difficult, even if I meet with colleagues on the Hill, both in the Senate or the House side, to actually get through to the core of what is a concept. Is there a master plan? What can we expect further steps with regard to politics, Russia's aggression against Ukraine? How does this influence Europe and the Western Balkans? I think overall what we can say with regard to US international engagement is there is still interest. So it's not a complete withdrawal from world politics or geopolitics into the homeland to secure United States within the West, the Atlantic Ocean as a natural border in the Pacific in the West, and in the East, the Atlantic Ocean as a natural border. There's still a lot of interest, but I feel reminded of Trump 1.0 when I heard a lot of times our patience has been used up. Back then, this was a lot of times with regard to fulfillment of 2% GDP defense spending. Now it goes even further. It's not only about money. It's about taking care of peace and stability and security in your backyard, as the Americans often refer to with regard to the Western Balkan countries. So I think one of the lessons we need to learn is that we fill in the gap with regard to, as European Union, with regards to the democratization projects, with regard to fostering rule of law, but at the same time, I think everybody who is tries to become a member of the European Union, be it having a candidate status already or not, needs to understand better, and the European Union needs to be much clearer in that regard, that this needs to be conditionalized. As you all know, not so far ago, there had been a new methodology introduced when it comes to enlargement process. But I think we need to talk more about conditions, at the same time incentives, and then coming briefly to the security issue, the withdrawal that is there of the United States of America in the region also has a detrimental effect on security. And I'm talking about KFOR, and I'm talking also about a EUFOR, which is a European mission. But you can see that, I see rising of tensions, a growing, at least, sense of instability. And we really need to refocus as European Union on this region, because if we don't do that, it's not only the Russians, but also the Russians, they will play with their malign influence in that region. And that is not in the interest of the European Union. I want them to be closer to us. I want that we focus on them more. Everything seems to be overshadowed, legitimately to some extent, by the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine. WB6, as it is referred to here, the Western Balkan 6 countries in the Bundestag, has never, ever, since I'm in the Bundestag, this is since 2009, the last 16 years, on the top priority list, which is not good. Only when tension come to emerge into conflicts, into violent conflicts, then all of a sudden we say, oh, what's going on there? Do we even want them? Then all of a sudden we pay attention. But this is a wrong approach. So my call for the European Union is, now more than ever, with the withdrawal of the United States from the region, is take care, refocus, take care of some of the projects that are not financed now by the Americans anymore. Democracy, rule of law, fight against corruption, fight against organized crime, stable political situation. That is something we need to fill in, more conditionalized and more incentives and conditions in the enlargement process. And one last thing that I will finish with is, there's a lot of hypocrisy in the Western world, in Europe, in the United States. I just learned some days back that, as we all know, Dodik of Republika Srpska is sanctioned as a person by the United States of America, not by the EU, for some reasons that we all know. But his son, for example, Dodik's son, is sponsoring, financing dinners in some capitals of the region. Donald Trump Jr. is giving dinners in Belgrade and in, I think it was Bucharest recently, and Dodik's son was present. And the whole family, as far as I understand, Dodik's family is sanctioned, and questions why he is here, Dodik's son. At a Donald Trump Jr. dinner, Dodik's son said, I'm one of the sponsors. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Peter, also for this nice telling anecdote. Let me immediately move on to Adi to share his perspective on what the current state of the American administration means for the Western Balkans.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me. Since I don't think I need to add more of the arguments why I also share the opinion and assessment that the US withdrawal has happened since Trump's administration, I will focus more on what that withdrawal might mean. And maybe in a concluding part of this introductory remark, I might touch upon what could happen if we see the return of the US in the Western Balkans, which at this point I actually would not exclude, but that return would be much more different than what we have seen so far. I think to understand what the withdrawal could mean for the Western Balkans is best by seeing what the previous administration, for example, has actually done in the region. And while I don't want to make appraisal for the previous administration, there's a lot of criticism that one could say about it. I think there were two very important events in the region that happened where the US had a lot of influence on, and both of them were sadly crisis management. And I think by looking at them, maybe we can understand what the withdrawal means for the region, might mean, and where the EU and other friends of the region would need to fill the gaps. Two big incidents or two big negative crises in the region would be, first of all, Banjska in September 2023, and everything that has led to it happening and taking place. We were really on the verge of having a much worse situation on the hand. And the second one is an attempt by Milorad Dodik in Bosnia and Herzegovina to collapse the state-level institutions in the late 2021 and the beginnings of 2022. Let me focus just on the Banjska incident. I mean, it happened in September 2023, but what led to it was a lot of activities by the Biden administration trying to highlight the danger and trying to prevent much worse from happening. I mean, it was the US administration which first identified Radojcic in December 2021 and put it on sanctions for what it was doing and for what it was planning and for what had then in September 2023 happened. It was Cholet who in a congressional hearing confirmed the reporting of the New York Times on the links between Radojcic, hooligans, and President Vučić, not in detail of what was reported there, there, but at the general level. And in September, when Banjska happened, it was the US administration that released the intelligence data on piling up of this much stronger military equipment by the Serbia on the border with Kosovo, and the fear of what might happen afterwards. It was the phone calls by Antony Blinken on President Vučić that has forced, in a way, Serbia to withdraw its forces from there. And this is exactly what I think we must be afraid of if we see the withdrawal of the US, who will be stepping in with not just collecting the intelligence, not just supporting, providing the background for it, but also then being involved on that basis to try to prevent much worse events from happening. I think this is one of the issues where we will see. Just as one point, I don't want to go into details, but one point, when we've seen the pileup of the military on the Kosovo border in September, October 2023, and when both the White House and State Department reported on it publicly, it was actually Richard Grenell who came up with several tweets in a row saying that those were just pure lies, that were accusations against Belgrade and Serbia, and that in fact, according to his knowledge, nothing was happening on the border with Kosovo. We now know also as a fact from background conversations that Richard Grenell plans to be more active, in particular on Kosovo-Serbia file, and that he plans to engage in later this year or maybe eventually next year. But if this is what he plans to bring on the table, that means not just hiding what is happening and what the US intelligence might be collecting in the region, but that he might also be twisting those, then there is a reason for not just the region to fear, but everyone else who's a friend of the region. Same goes for Bosnia and Herzegovina. I mean, it was in 2021, 2022 that Milorad Dodik and his supporters tried for the first time what they've are doing in the past couple of months, and that is to collapse the state level institutions. It was the US who went in with the sanctions. It was the US diplomacy which tried to bring together a coalition that would push against, of course, with support and with active engagement also of Germany and other actors. But at the moment, I'm just focusing on the US one. And I think there also the question is what happens when the US withdrawal happens. In case of Bosnia and Herzegovina, since Trump's administration, we actually have seen new crises similar to that one on 2021 and 2022. And there, the words by Secretary Rubio, but also words by diplomats, US diplomats have been similar. They haven't changed the basic position on what the Dayton Peace Agreement is, what the role of different institutions in this arena are, and what the position on the independence and sovereignty of the country. But the amount of energy, diplomatic energy, but also the tone of the language has changed. We've seen now, beginning of May, UN Security Council conversations or the meeting on Bosnia and Herzegovina, and there the US contribution to it was, 2 times shorter than the previous May one. OHR was put down to just being someone who implements the civilian aspect of the Dayton Peace Agreement, while the last year it was talk about the bond powers, it was talk about the partners needing to support the OHR. Same goes for the EU4 It was recognized its importance for keeping the stability in the country, but last year it was much more that the administration was adding to it. And on the ground, I was just last week in Sarajevo, US Embassy and its staff are not present. And the people I spoke to actually say, well, we hope they will stay not present. And we don't want to, go and ask them questions and put pressure on them to come up with positions, because we're afraid if actually we put an extra pressure on them, what we might get as a result. And with that, I would maybe my concluding remark for this introductory point, this is what I'm afraid. I'm afraid that yes, we see now withdrawal, we see less of the US, but what happens in a year or so if we do actually see the comeback of the US? What kind of the US will come back, and what kind of EU and other partners of the region will be welcoming or seeing this comeback of the US? And that is, I think, what we need to be focused most on, preparing the EU side, UK side, and all the others to once and if that happens, that the region and its friends in the West cannot see much more negative happening than it's expected if it would happen at this point.
Thanks, Adi. I think this was very important. One point is the crisis management. Who will do the crisis management? The other one is what damage might the Trump administration do in the Western Balkans? And with those key insights, I hand over to Vukosava to hear from her perspective.
Thank you very much. Greetings from Brussels. I hope my network will stay stable, since I'm, sending greetings from the hotel room. So I'll be very, brief. And Adnan, thank you also for your inputs, because especially on this American embassy presence, it's the same in Serbia. They are actually not present, and this is the thing. It looks like they are really not, in Serbia, in Belgrade. It's like they vanished, at least politically. The Serbian government or regime welcome actually the opportunity to use Trump to legitimize undemocratic practices. And this is actually the feeling we have in Belgrade, in Serbia. Effects of the Trump administration and, let's say, radical narratives he promotes promptly spilled over to Serbia. What we faced is that, our government, really declared the war on democracy and human rights, watchdogs, critical voices. And in Serbia, we are today facing seriously growing repression that started several months ago with border detentions, mass surveillance, expulsion of EU and other foreign citizens from Serbia. And more what we see is also politically motivated arrests. And all repression expanded into new forms with the US aid shutdown. We can't link only with the US aid, but if we look at US aid as a global political and developmental gatekeeper from anti-democratic values and practices, actually the doors are widely open now. As soon as President Trump's executive order about the US aid was published, the Serbian government representatives and pro-regime media started referring to US aid as the organized criminal group that was taken from the tweets of President Trump. And as I said, the Serbian government announced the war against the watchdogs, and they started, using this narrative about the US aid as, talking about, local organizations as someone who is actually money laundering that money coming from US aid. And of course, the Serbian regime totally ignored the fact that the government institutions were the main partners and the beneficiaries of the US aid. State launched a campaign to crack down on critical voices under the overarching, long-standing narratives about the color revolution, domestic traitors, foreign mercenaries, etc., etc. How that looked, specifically in practice, the prosecutor ordered a deliberate and selective police raid. I think most of our audience knows that actually 4 organizations' offices were raided. That's the Democracy Watchdogs. And while raided the office, the prosecutor also was quoting in his public addresses. They were quoting US officials, Trump, Musk, FBI director, and again, quoting about the US aid as a criminal organization, money laundering, etc., and using this basis for raiding civil society organizations. What we see on the ground also accept these rates and repression is that its effect on civil society and independent media and human rights mechanisms that is, I would say, devastating. We are still assessing the damage. But, like the shutdown of the USAID has cut the, like lifeline of democracy and human rights mechanisms built by many actors, including the state for decades. So some examples, like goes to, for example, I mean, like, let's start from us, not as most important, but, like CRTA was for 10 years election monitor organization. So by cutting the USAID, like we lost actually the support for election observation. What we also see is judicial capacities like vanishing or decreasing. What's also vanishing is legal support to citizens to pursue and protect their rights. All these things were funded by USAID. And of course, it's not only about the money, it's about support to democratic processes, political support that, as we heard from interlocutors, that actually really is not present. So with Trump's administration in power for months now, we have seen a lot of action and cooperation between Serbian regime and Trump's family. And this, let's say, inner circle. So we can hear about the private projects, friendships, but actually nothing on the political side. So I would stop here. I hope this was enough for this intro, and I'm happy and looking forward for the future discussion.
Thanks. I think you gave us additional elements of what is missing with the American administration not being present. You mentioned the silence of the embassies, the lack of political kind of engagement, but also, of course, how it serves as a source of legitimizing repressive policies, in particular in the case of USAID and how it's been used by the Serbian government. Turning to Manuel, as somebody who's been working also with the previous US administration over the recent years in the Western Balkans, in terms of analyzing what is missing or what has disappeared, because I think that is very important. I mean, I guess when we're looking at this landscape, we have what is gone with American withdrawal, where there seems to be a consensus. The question is then also what has come instead, what is coming instead, and I think there the jury is out. We worry about what comes instead, but it's not yet fully articulated. It's there in certain hints. Vukosava, you were mentioning the business interest, the family interest, rather than a foreign policy as a strategic generalizable interest, and to analyze also what could be done to replace that gap which emerged, or to counteract maybe even malign influences. So from that point of view, maybe Manuel, you can tell us a little bit of, where do you see the American influence in working in the region over the last years as in your function as special representative, and what will be missed as a result?
Well, the first is the US, next to what the previous speakers already were talking about, this concrete incidents, and then the role of the US as leading force in NATO, I would say even, yeah. The US was backing massively the European approach to the Kosovo-Serbia dialogue, making it clear that you could also say that this was to a certain extent perhaps a removal, but you could even say that this removal of doing it themselves led into a massive backing of the EU-led, the EU-facilitated dialogue, which was still important, and we don't see yet like the result of that, because I think actually there are many reasons to talk about. Peter knows better. Sometimes in politics, I'm a believer of the chaos theory in politics sometimes, yeah. And the second is that the US had a clear-cut strategy of the EU integration is the path for the region, which is also unclear if it's still there or not. But in this clarity, we don't see yet the consequences of the change there. It's like you play football and the bad team still doesn't know if there is a referee or not. So they would still be a little bit careful because there might be the referee still on the pitch or might come somebody else. But if with time it's proven that if the time is proving that there is no referee or no capable referee, then of course the foul play might change suddenly even. And we saw these tests already. I think the situation regarding Bosnia and the Dodik and also Vucic on it was to a certain extent fight for survival, to a certain extent also a test, like perhaps a necessary test, but testing red lines for sure. And clearly the travel of Vucic to Moscow, it's a clear sign. I mean, he is off. He is clearly off. He needs Putin for something. And I think if listening to Vukosava, we know what this will be. Now we have people in prison in Serbia permanently, like on short run, but always somebody. This is new. This is completely new. This is a Russification of the domestic politics of Serbia, and for sure, I mean, he wasn't there the last 2 years, so all this bullshit of I have to go, it's ridiculous. Yeah, it's clearly ridiculous. You didn't have to go in 2022, 23, 24, and now you have to go because they have so much pressure on you. It's clearly that you want something from them. It's unbelievable here. You think that you will need him, so you have to go again to get something. And I think it's, if you look on the branches of cooperation between Russia and Serbia, which are more important and less important, I mean, it will be not investment. Yeah, I mean, you can just think about and have a negative expectation, then you know what will be the topic. Yeah. So I think with the former administration, this would not happen. Yeah. But of course, like, what shall we say? I mean, you know, on the way how Trump is himself communicating to Putin, like from which moral instant shall we say, yeah? So Europe must step in. And the communication of the EU on this was like, oh, we want you to explain that you love us still. Like, okay. So no referee there, clearly. Yeah. I would take this really serious. I think this is a test and a signal, and we failed to react on that clearly. And I thank you, Peter, for being so clear from your side on that, because I think you're right. Second point, which I think is important, is you know, the role of the US in the last years was, of course, not only that in some moments they were massively engaging and so on. It was also that first question of trust, will they be there or not? Second is, if they pull out with political efforts, but even with perhaps participation in KFOR or something, it will be the question who will move in instead. So it's not only the removal of the US, but the missing clarity who will be able to go in, which is relevant to see. And then, of course, you have this points that US is suddenly a role model for autocratic tendencies. US is suddenly an argument, perhaps, why you have to do it, even if you would like to do it the European way. And US is perhaps an excuse. So I think in the soft way, the EU was pushing reforms in the last 15 years in the region. Sometimes the US was moving in pushing for that reforms with a more robust approach. I mean, there are different examples. There's this Albanian example a long time ago when the DP has been pushed in agreeing on the justice reform. Peter remembers, I think, quite well. There's the example on Prespa. So we can discuss for sure if this was good or bad, but for sure. sometimes when the EU needed somebody who is like, doing our work with a bit different approach, the US was there. Not only in like a crisis is there, and they can say like, don't move into Kosovo otherwise. Also in these points where EU wanted to get something done. And I think it's not in the way that Trump would be now against it or not, but yeah. And there's one last point which I think is very important for this scenario which you made on the removal is the one problem, but the comeback might be the some people, and I don't know if it's right, but some people, and Peter, I would be interested in your opinion on that. Some people say that economically Trump has some huge problems actually to deliver in his term. And usually, I'm a historian, so usually if you have such a kind of politics, much participating from personal charisma of the leader, let's say it this way, this is Max Weber, yeah. In the history over the last 1,000 years, there would be usually two ways of handling domestic unrest or domestic problems with it's not good enough what's done for domestic stuff. First is the classical way, which was there until like 1914, perhaps, expansion of territory as, something economical, but also for pride. Yeah. So we saw some arguments that this might happen, or I don't know what will happen on this. It's not Western Balkan 6, Iceland or Greenland or these areas. It's not my business. Second, can be like, I'm the peacemaker. Yeah. So that my international reputation of Angela Merkel was participating from such an esteem of legitimacy quite strongly that her domestic track record was, I would say, maximum medium, but everybody said like the world leaders are listening to her. She's able to make a deal, which was true actually. Yeah, she was a lot of main summits on world scale. She was actually saving with her, capabilities. So if peace in Ukraine fails for Trump in proving that he is the deal maker who can change the world, and they're looking for other areas, I think it's better if the Balkans is not pretending too much that there might be a success easily found there, and that Rick Grinnell and Donald Trump are remembering the Washington Agreement and the implementation of it. Yeah, so I don't know if the Balkans is good enough for getting TV time in US, but this is a possible scenario which is which I wanted to say here without judging it.
Thanks, Manuel. So we would go into our second round, and I would ask you very specifically from, I think, with a consensus, the withdrawal of the United States in the Western Balkans is there. There's a certain maybe inertia of it yet manifesting itself. As Peter was saying, there are still people in the State Department who continue the job they've been doing before, but it's more by inertia rather than by design. So the question really is, and we've heard a number of examples of what the United States' presence in the region has been important for. It's financial, it's supporting EU integration, it's doing things the EU can't do or hasn't done so far, individual sanctions, in a certain way, crisis management in a way which is more pronounced, more outspoken than what the EU is usually doing. Supporting the EU as intervening in domestic politics of the region. And as Manuel said, not all of it we might find to be always have been productive, but it's certainly been very present and very significant. And all of that seems to be gone right now. So the question really is, because the answers of the EU has to do more, but the question is not what it has to do more, but what it has to do. Or how it has to do it to actually fill the gap. Because just more EU in the way it's been acting so far, more money, more enlargement strategies probably will not take care of this issue. So the question to all of you is really what we can do in this. But I'm seeing here that I'm very, very glad that Valbona is joining us. I know you had challenges with the delayed flights. I'm very glad that that you're jumping right in, probably from some location at Tirana Airport or somewhere. So I'm very glad you're with us. We've had a first round.
Thank you, Florian. Yeah, thank you, Florian.
We've had a first round of assessing what the impact of the American withdrawal is for the Western Balkans. So before we go to the second round, where we analyze what can be done from the European perspective, not just more, but what specifically, maybe I would like to hear very briefly your insight. How do you see the American policy towards the Western Balkans? The consensus of the previous panelists has been basically withdrawal, nothing happening at the moment in multiple ways, but also bracing for a potential interest of the Trump administration in the Western Balkans and what that might mean and how disruptive that might be for the European Union and for the Western Balkans itself. So Valbona, I'll give you the floor for your insights.
Well, thank you, Florian, and thank you to everyone for the invitation. I'm so sorry. I apologize for being late. Had a transatlantic flight that was late, so I'm really taking this call from the airport. When you say withdrawal and not anything happening right now, I don't think I will equalize them. I don't think that's the same thing. So the fact that we don't see much from the new Trump administration happening in the Western Balkans, that is true, but we haven't seen much also in other areas. And so I would not say it's a withdrawal. And I would like to make here a couple of points. The first one, which I believe is important, and I'm pretty sure you must have discussed in the conversation, sorry I missed it. I would like to bring up the condemnation, the press release of the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, that issued a strong condemnation on the action taken by Milorad Dodik, where he expressed deep concern over the escalating separatist activities in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And actually, he called upon the political leaders to engage in a constructive and responsible dialogue. Really firmly uncertain. And I think that's important that the disintegration of Bosnia and Herzegovina is not an option. And so he even expressed hope that proactive measure then could prevent the emergence of another conflict in Europe. And I think this is very important. This shows that the Western Balkans, like in the case of the European Union, I would say now more also from the United States, is seen from a geopolitical security perspective, which I believe that urgency, even in the terms of Euro-Atlantic integration, that was missing over the last decade. So I believe that that's a good sign. The second thing that I wanted to point out is that, and then here also it's not been only Secretary Rubio, but we have also had a bipartisanship, declaration from the U.S. Senate Foreign Affairs Committee that has taken action with partisan members urging actually Secretary Rubio to expand targeted sanctions against Dodik and his enablers. So that is good. And what I hear is that we all know about the act, the Prosperity Democracy Act, that was not passed in the previous legislation in the Senate on the Western Balkans. There are talks that this will come back, meaning that the Western Balkan will still be high or higher than before in the agenda of the U.S. Congress, more specifically in this case, Senate. The second point that I wanted to make is that we cannot see the Western Balkans perspective and relations with the United States divided from what's happening overall in Europe. And maybe you have already pointed out this, and I'm repeating myself, so I apologize. But what I wanted to say is that the Western Balkans is critical, or relations between the EU and the United States will be critical for the future of the Western Balkans, for the Euro-Atlantic future of the Western Balkans. And the first thing where we see turmoil right now in these relations, the first one is the issue of Ukraine. And we have seen some positive steps in the right direction from the Trump administration when it comes to Ukraine, to viewing it differently from a few months ago. And I believe that will be crucial for the geopolitical perspective of the Western Balkans. And the second issue is trade and tariffs between United States and Europe, which now they are suspended. And I believe that if we have an agreement there, a lot of other issues will be solved resolved. And part of that will be also the issue of the Western Balkans, where we could have a bipartisan agreement in the future for the region. And then my third point is that I think it's sometimes, Florian, I believe that we keep, even as scholars, we keep repeating ourselves, or maybe things do not change in the Western Balkans. Because if we had even this conversation 5 years ago, 7 years ago, actually issues are the same, challenges are the same. You know, we know what the security, what the situation, economic, political, security, what are the bilateral issues in the region. However, we don't know how to resolve them. So I think the third point that I wanted to mention is that we, the leaders of the Western Balkans, have to realize that they're not anymore a priority, and they will not be a priority. People do not wake up and think what happens in the Western Balkans. And so they need to come up with creative ways to be part of the transatlantic solutions, not just issues per se. So what can the Western Balkans offer to the European Union, to the United States, to the transatlantic community when it comes to 21st century security challenges? Those could be energy, could be LNG, could be migration, could be China, could be Russia. There is a long list of issues that I think the perspective needs to change, and they need to become part of transatlantic solutions rather than always only issues. So those are my 3 points. I'll be happy to expand on any of those.
Thank you very much, Valbona, for putting that perspective in. I think it gives a different angle to what we've discussed so far. I think you've interjected a certain sense of optimism about the salvageability of transatlantic relations and having a joint, at least some kind of joint agreements on some fundamental issues. But I think the other point you also mentioned, of course, is that the status quo we're departing from for the Western Balkans was not one of great success, and that the transatlantic relationship, which did work more, let's say, friction-free before the Trump administration, solved all of the issues in the region. So certainly this challenge is not that we're talking about something new problems, but rather about maybe existing problems worsening in many ways. But I would like to then go into our second round, is in a certain way how to respond to those challenges. Peter, why don't you kick us off?
So yes, I indicated earlier that, you know, and everyone on the panel more or less agreed or said things like, well, similar things, is that we need to fill in the gap. There was also this notion about, well, is there really a withdrawal? Is there really a vacuum that the United States leave behind in the Western Balkans? And I'm very happy that, Valbona, you put it in perspective, that there's a change in quality also, and it's not the end of transatlantic relations, also not with regard to the Western Balkans. Thanks for that. Sometimes have to remind myself as well. I think we can see on the one hand somehow a retraction and withdrawal, if you so will, but then again also a change of engagement. Maybe that has not so much to do with politics. And I indicated earlier, before you, Valbona, joined us in the panel, some of the business activities there by the Trump family, his junior, Donald Trump Jr., and the son of Mio Dodik, financing, sponsoring dinners in Belgrade and Bucharest, given by Donald Trump Jr. Anyway, so U.S. sanctioned individuals by the United States sponsoring the U.S. president's son's dinner. This is special. Anyway, so, but it doesn't help. It all doesn't help. We could lament about this all day long, but we should not. So restoring of trust of the role of the European Union, make us more credible, more honest, more transparent. The role of the European Union of the past, I don't know, let's say 10 years, 5 years, I don't know. Although Manuel was for 3.5 years the special representative of the German government there, did a fantastic job, I have to say. Europe was weak, was absent, at least not didn't have, and I think still doesn't have a master plan, a coherent concept. So We need that, a coherent approach by all 27 member countries of the European Union when it comes to Western Balkans politics. And that has not only, but of course, foremost to do with the enlargement process. We need to regain trust here and credibility. That is very, very important. What I also think could be that we use the IPA funds that we are giving to the countries more conditionalized and more specifically for projects where the USA now are not present anymore. That is with regard to the projects of rule of law and to foster democracy. I think that is, especially when you look that USAID has been cut off, I think we need to refocus what I said earlier, but specifically IPA money into these kind of projects. Then we should also see what the European Union can do to support independent media. We have, I think, maybe I overheard it, have not yet mentioned Radio Free Europe and Voice of America, that, you know, also are de facto dead, more or less, or at least have to struggle now. So the European Union should also think about putting more money and also giving like consultancy assistance to independent media in this regard. I think that is something that we need to build up more consequently. And as a last point, the idea, which is not new, this is not from me, is to somehow structure a transatlantic network for democracy. I mean, there's some, like the Atlantic Council and some other think tanks that are doing excellent programs and jobs. But over the time of, like, when I was transatlantic coordinator, and apart from that, I saw, you know, I was always wondering, why can we not do jointly together more under an umbrella of a network that puts think tanks from both sides of the Atlantic closer together and come up with or structure joint programs that will, you know, be very, very helpful, because not the EU itself cannot do everything by itself. I mean, it's like an anonymous authority or body can give money with the support of the 27 EU member countries. Some support more, some give more, some less. But apart from that, I mean, some of the very good work that the think tanks are already doing could be, you know, brought to the next, could be leveraged and be shaped in a more efficient way to really foster democracy and rule of law project. I think these 3 points are something that I would propose, and where the EU needs to step up. And again, I mean, for me, is center of everything is regaining, restoring credibility by the European Union. Man, we have lost a lot. So we should not only complain and point with a finger to the White House and to Washington, D.C. We failed. And I exclude my good friend Manuel Sarrazin. It was good that you were there and doing your stuff, being very present in the region, but it was simply not enough.
Thanks, Peter. I think you raised 2 very important issues. One is you know, how to regain European Union credibility in the region. And the second one is, of course, stepping in with certain projects which have been cut. And I'm glad you mentioned Voice of America and Radio Free Europe, which are, you know, very important, especially when it talks about providing media content for media which are now going to be relying on Russia Today or Sputnik for news, maybe, or having less counterbalance. So that's something where I think Europe is well advised to be more voiceful, and, you know, maybe not selling off, you know, or not having, you know, its own media channels, not really being all that independent anymore as some of them used to be. So Adi, why don't you add to our list of what could be done to step in to fill the gap?
No, thank you very much. I think your question, how to respond to these challenges, starts from understanding what the challenges are. And I think it would be easy here to, and it is true, it's very good that Secretary Rubio had his tweet and that we have seen Senate and Congress having a joint statement. But I think it would be wrong for us to conclude that just because of that tweet or the statement, everything behind that is the same as it was in 2021 and 2022, when we had a similar attack on the constitutional and the order of Bosnia and Herzegovina, because at this moment, first of all, I mean, Valbona, for you, it should be easy in DC to find out how it came about that this tweet was tweeted, and then you would understand where it came from. Furthermore, from this side of transatlantic, it's very clear that the US diplomats in Brussels, here in Berlin, but also in the region, are not doing what they were doing in 2021 and 2022. So throwing the tweet as a evidence that the situation has not changed, or that it is the same, would be leading us to a completely wrong conclusion of what the challenge is. Challenge is not that this tweet happened. The challenge is how that tweet happened, and that nothing behind it in diplomatic and all the other resources of the US were followed in the way that they were followed in 21-22. And the second challenge that comes out of it is that, due to the fact that Valbona rightfully pointed out, the situation is similar elsewhere in many other regions of the world, is that we should expect in next 6 months or next year that the US administration will find time, or will find permanent staff that will find time to deal with the Western Balkans. And there, all these connections that the Trump family, that the Richard Grenell, who has also an official position in the administration, has with some of the actors in the region, and the agendas of those actors in the region do raise a concern and need as a big challenge for the stability of the region. So sorry for this, but I think first and foremost, we need to understand what the challenge is. Second, I would say that the problem is that the actors, as I think Manuel mentioned, the problem is that the actors in the region think that the EU, but also other actors who are more active in the past couple of months, I would add their United Kingdom, but also Turkey, will not compensate in the same way that the previous EU administration was active in the region. So Vučić going to Russia, or Vučić doing something in Bosnia and Herzegovina at the moment, he's doing it because also he's testing to see if the administrations in Europe will figure out what he's doing and if they will react to what he's doing. So he's smartly did the thing, he first announced that he's going to Russia, then he played that the soldiers of Serbia would go also to Moscow. Then he said, well, soldiers will not go. And then we ended up with High Representative Kallas saying, well, it's good, at least soldiers didn't go. So he now knows partly where the red line is. So I think next couple of months are important in that way, because here in Europe, but also in the UK and some of the other partners, we need to understand what the challenges are. We need to see if anyone can step in and understand what the actors might be testing and what they might be doing, and to push against them. But over a medium term and long term, we also need to think how EU can motivate actors in the region to have a more positive and more proactive agenda for not just their own countries, but also for the region in general. And I think there as well, we need to draw conclusions from what has been happening in the last 5 to 10 years, and understand to what extent our instruments, policies, rewards, carrots, sticks, whatever you would like to call it, can work in the atmosphere where it is. I mean, the facts on the ground, with that I will conclude, facts on the ground have been created. This European Commission has told in public, both to Albania and Montenegro, that they are able to prepare them for EU membership in next couple of years, if of course the countries reform and if they do what is necessary. So these facts are out there, they're in public, we've heard them. I think that the EU member states, and Berlin and Paris in particular, will need to decide whether they will respond positively to that assessment by the Commission or not. And we, taking lessons from the past, one needs to be very careful of what will happen. Same goes for the other countries. I mean, Bosnia and Herzegovina has its own crisis. Will the conclusion from it be we need to strengthen the office of the High Representative? We need to go back to trying some of the instruments that we've tried and that have not worked very well? or will we draw some other conclusions? Same goes for Kosovo-Serbia dialogue. Will we now support the implementation of the Brussels-Ohrid agreements and want to see them really being implemented, or will we go back to some of the old approaches to also that issue? So I think in thinking of what needs to happen, it's not abstract. Some of the realities on the ground exist. Some of the facts have been created, and I think political response, in particular from Berlin and Paris, but also from Brussels, will need to then happen, taking into account of all of that.
Great, thank you so much. I would give Vukosava and Manuel a chance, and then Peter, there are some questions anyhow which I would like to address to you in the second round. Vukosava, why don't you go ahead?
Thank you, Florian. I'm sorry, Manuel, I guess you wanted to respond quickly, but I'll do my best to be brief. I was carefully listening, all of you, and Peter, the thing you mentioned actually was important for my intervention now, because I completely agree with you when you are talking about
I think we have lost Vukosava. She was warning us that she's in the capital of the European Union.
Me. Yeah.
It's the European Union's doing. So I think I would give Manuel the floor while Vukosava hopefully can negotiate with the EU an improvement of her internet connection.
I mean, as you said in the beginning, I'm the former special representative, so I'm here privately and the president of the Southeast Europe Association. So anybody who got this wrong, current state of art, just to re-announce it, to make clearly my language, that Ohrid implementation, you know, for implementing something, first you need to have a government, right? And if the scenario, which I believe will happen, is that Kosovo will wait until presidential renominations coming up, then we are short before even the scheduled presidential elections in Serbia. So the political room for implementation in Kosovo and Serbia is very, very low, given that at least both main actors so far don't want it, obviously, as well. But the room for finding excuses is quite big. So what does it mean? It means the EU needs to step in and to unilaterally engage in setting the scene. If you want to make serious, you want to join, this is the implementation which we will ask from you. So we need to have a clear implementation agenda being developed and set out as a condition for enlargement. And if then they fail, bad luck. So quite interesting how the reaction would be. Yeah. Second is, I think one option would be Germany stepping in. But Peter already described what is the problem. Even when there was a position like mine existing, it was difficult to step in everywhere at all the time, especially also because when only Germany is stepping in, always you should coordinate with the partners in the Quint in the EU. So I think Germany will step in. I think the new government will take this as a priority in a setup, which we will see. But in reality, we need also the EU to step in. And you said it so clearly, you need a coherent approach. But we don't have a coherent approach on status of Kosovo. And we don't have a coherent approach on how to judge the pathway of Serbia, right? So is Vučić our guarantee for peace and stability in the region? This is why we should be a bit more nice to him, or is he the biggest threat for the region? Yeah, and I think how to get a coherent approach among the EU, if even I think you cannot agree on that or find a compromise in between on that main positions. So I think it will be difficult to get a coherent approach from EU for reaching big steps. This is why I think it would be very important to engage in those next steps, which are clearly linked to the conditioning of growth plan, of the next step of EU enlargement, which can be very much seen also in credible, we do now, then we get this in a kind of reform-oriented, value-oriented transactionalism instead of this transactionalism. Second, the next point, which I would say which is important, I think in almost none of the Western Balkan 6, you in the moment have enough political will for the necessary reforms to really move forward to EU for different reasons. And then, of course, we would exclude to a certain extent Albania and Montenegro, but in those very important clusters, also there the political will or capability is to a certain extent, of course, limited, and we will see how it develops. And this is not only because they are stupid or bad guys or bad girls, women there. It's also because we are not so sexy in the moment anymore as European Union, for reasons which would have another seminar to exploit on. So on the one hand, EU or Germany or both should try to step in when the referee is moving out. On the other hand, the political will which is missing in the region cannot be substituted by just wanting it more from us. Yeah, like we want it more. You don't have to do so much reforms because we want it more. This will not function with the state of art of how European Union is today. This idea of we make a purely geopolitical enlargement, it is, I think, a pre-Amsterdam Treaty change status perhaps, but for sure not an after Lisbon Treaty EU reality. Yeah. So I think this is where these points can come in. Enhance regional cooperation, bring in these possibilities of participation in specific parts of the internal market, bind this together with political will, which can be generated in formats like Berlin process, and try to have, like, you know, not make peace in the world immediately, but to bring steps forward anyhow, the given circumstances and the lack of political will, perhaps on both sides, but also in the region. And there, I think Germany with the new government can make really a difference, I think. Because a lot of guys in the region will think like, now it's our partner party, EPP, so everything will be fine. And I think they're underestimating the new team a lot. Which I hope at least. I mean, perhaps it's wishful thinking, but my experience with the new guys is don't underestimate them. Last point.
Yeah.
What really can concretely be done is we need to finance election watchdogs. For every of the, if it's Dodic's regional elections, if it's the elections in Albania, if it's in Serbia, we need to have really hardcore election watchdogs, which can test the credibility of the electoral process and be a real problem if you rig too much elections. And EU is not stepping in fast enough there, I think. And the next elections in Bosnia, which are coming up in October 26, would be the test. We made the pilot projects on this electronic, I don't know, it's better on this electronic ballot systems. And it would be very important to show if you build down democracy and do more like election engineering, we will organize that not only OTIE and other institutions, but also civil society is capable of proving it and proving the extent, if the extent was relevant or not. And I think this can be done. This is expensive, but it is relatively cheap compared to other stuff. But the first thing you need to do for that is, of course, to announce to the region we see a growing problem on that. Despite among different countries, different situation. And then the third and last point is freedom of media and pressure on journalists. But this is just sorry for being too long.
Thanks, because I want to bring in Vukosava and Valbona, who both should also respond. Vukosava, you were interrupted. I just passed the buck, so to speak.
No, it's okay. I hope now it will work. I mean, like, not to repeat, but maybe several things that we heard. Just a small reflection on this. Peter was saying about restoring the trust and credibility of the EU. I mean, like, and that EU failed, at least in the region. I mean, like, I can talk about Serbia. I completely agree. I think this is the path, and it cannot happen over the night. So it's the process. But just the thing is that EU made in Serbia itself a non-actor. This has to change. I mean, like, being a non-actor or being a silent on breaches of the law, on undemocratic actions, on like breaching the rule of law, etc., etc. This is the thing, because that increased the frustration. And if we are talking about the role of EU with withdrawing the US and US aid, I mean, like, I really do expect from EU to step in, to fill the gap. I think all of us understand that, filling the gap of the EU and US aid, I mean, like, it's a huge thing. It cannot be done in a year, but just like it has to be, it has to be done together with us in partnership way to select the priorities and then to react. Because, like, as Manuel was saying, and thank you for this, I mean, like, when our offices has been raided, that was on Tuesday and Wednesday. The police was 28 hours in our office. On Thursday morning, Manuel was in Belgrade, meeting 4 organizations, inviting EU and French and German ambassadors to join him. That was not the initiative of the local ambassadors. It was Manuel's initiative. That was partnership. That was a support. This is in a practical way, like how being with, like true value-based democratic partners, like stand aside. So this is, I mean, like, I would say that, we as Serbia and the Western Balkans really need Europe to step up and to fill the void left by the US withdrawal. But we are not looking for tutors, we are looking for partners. And this is the thing, free and fair elections in Serbia are, like I would say, everyone's interest, but we cannot do it alone. So, for example, staying silent on Vucic's visit to Moscow, I really believe it's not the way, because that increased the frustration of the, like I would say, democratic and European forces in Serbia. Turning the blind eye is not the way. So that's not the way how we are restoring the trust. And I would say partnership. We need from the EU partners, because, it will be really difficult, to continue without the US and USA as a player in the region.
Thanks, Vukosava. Valbona, you want to?
No, I completely agree with almost every point that was raised, and I would like to start with from Manuel, because Manuel is the example that actually you can get things done in the region. You can have deals, and you know how difficult it is. And I'd like to go back to the point of Adnan saying that I think, we have seen a lot of scapegoating in the region, be that towards the EU, be that towards the US, be that towards, Germany or other players for not resolving the issues. And so I think we need to have the understanding that the foreigners could not want change more, that people in the region want that change, or leaders in the region want that change. So I think, we should, with this mentality of scapegoating, I think that does not work out. I also like to point out that we already knew that during the Biden administration, we kept saying in meetings that there's a short window of opportunity, that bilateral issues can be solved, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What did the leaders do? They did not do much because there's no real interest in getting those issues solved. Interests in the region are for leaders to be in power and continue to have their vested interest. I would have expected, actually, and I'm here, I'm a little bit more critical to the European Union, that has been, the game also in town for a long time, not just recently. I would have expected to have a more proactive, move towards the Western Balkans when it comes to solving bilateral issues. I think the opportunity of enlargement, because as a result of the Ukraine war and crisis, has been there. Almost more than 2 years have passed. We all keep saying that this is the last chance. Are we going to take this train or not? And I believe when we talk about Albania and Montenegro, I think it's very important to show success in the region, because the European Union needs success stories to show that enlargement works out. And so I think that's on both sides, there is an interest. I believe that you already mentioned, the growth plan. It's an important move because it goes to people. It shows that, how they can converge or improve the living conditions before becoming EU members. But we'll see how we will, implement it, and what will be the benefits at the end of the day that will go to people. Next, I think the next 2 days in Tirana, it's the European political community. So all the political leaders are going together here and talk about the future of the region. So I think that it's time now for the EU to take a more proactive approach and walk the talk. I would like to see leaders in the EU take their own, take their own initiatives and be special envoys, if we want to call that, on resolving, bilateral issues that have been there forever. And we know that that's the main reason why the region is being left behind the rest of Central and Eastern Europe when it comes to EU enlargement.
Thanks, Valbona. Adi, I think you wanted to respond in particular, so why don't you go ahead?
Yes, I just wanted to make clear that I was not scapegoating. I was talking about whether the EU wants to have impact in the region, and to what extent the change in Washington, D.C. will change the circumstances in the region, and for that reason, whether the EU sees its interest in the region to act in one way or another. My point of criticism or an attempt of clarification was that next to the tweet that we've seen from Secretary Rubio, there's much behind it, which in comparison to 2021, 2022 did not happen and is different. And I think that needs to be taken into account when analyzing to what extent US has withdrawn, and look at that in the light of what might happen if the US finds again interest in the region and how it might return concretely to the region.
Thanks, Adi. And I think we're approaching gradually the end of our conversation. I would give everybody a chance to kind of pick up on some of the questions which have been posed. I think there are a couple of key points which maybe we want to reflect on. First of all, of course, is what if the land swap idea comes up again, which was important during the first Trump presidency and was put a break on, in particular by back then German Chancellor Angela Merkel. That seems to be certainly one of the possibilities, because the re-engagement of Richard Grenell was mentioned as an actor in the region. So that's one question: how can the EU react to such a revival if it were to come? The other question, which was asked to Peter Beyer, but could be others as well: how to improve coordination within the EU to deal with the Western Balkans, not just transatlantic, but also internal in the European Union. And then the last issue, which I think is important, I mean, it's like how the EU can confront autocratic leaders in the region more effectively. Vukosava was pointing it out. The silence or the complacency when it comes to Vučić is worrying, not just when it comes to his visit to Moscow, but also the long silence over the protests in Serbia. raises the question, can the EU be more forceful? And I mean, maybe, or not the EU as such, but individual member states, if it's blocked by the EU as such because of the unanimity requirements, to impose sanctions. We've seen it for Dodik by Germany and Austria, but use more clarity and a bit more putting clear words out there, which the US has been doing in the past. So last quick round, in the last, each 1 minute or so. Peter, why don't you go ahead?
Thank you very much. First, I want to also touch upon one or two other things. Election observation that was mentioned, I think, by Manuel or somebody else on the panel. I was just some days ago in Albania, just the last day before the elections, and some of the election observation teams seems to have finalized their respective reports before election day. Just one mention. So how credible is that? There was one explanation for Alexander Vucic's visit to Moscow, apart from the parade. He said, well, I needed to go because our gas contract with Gazprom, I think it was, is fading out by the end of, I don't know, next month or so. So I needed to renegotiate the terms. So that's why I needed to go. That was one of his explanations, as far as I heard. With regard to land swap idea, oh my God, yes. Rick Grenell was U.S. ambassador to Germany at exactly the same time where I was transatlantic coordinator of the German government. So I had a lot to do with him, even when he then talked himself into the presidential special envoy for the Western Balkans position. But this idea needs to be rejected. Second one, I come directly to the new leadership, because there was a call for leadership and better coordination within the European Union. And Manuel, I heard that you have confidence in the new actors here in Berlin and the new government. I have to criticize my own new government for doing away with the opposition as special representative, not only because of you, but I think that would have been necessary. Out of 25 positions as coordinators and special representative of the German government have been done away with. One of them, unfortunately, the Western Balkans thing, that I would have loved to remain in place, but anyway, it can't be helped. I just wanted to say that I have not as of yet talked with either Friedrich Merz or Joe Wadefuhl, Chancellor and EU Foreign Minister, specifically about their approach toward the Western Balkans. But I know for sure that Joe Wadefuhl is very knowledgeable when it comes to the Western Balkan countries. He knows all the actors personally for several years, and has led our Western Balkans working group in our parliamentary group for many years, where I was part of it. And so I know he pays attention, and I would urge him to pay special attention and to make this one of his very own individual agenda points in the foreign politics agenda, and show some leadership from Berlin, not only from the Chancellery but from the Federal Foreign Office in Brussels, and bring the group together. France, Austria, and others are interested in the region, and I think there's a new chance that we find a new efficiency, credibility, and new approaches towards Western Balkans. And so I think that's from my side. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Adi, you last observations.
Yes, I think EU needs to be a bit more braver. First of all, understand what the challenges are and how its interests can be damaged in the region if it doesn't act or if it's not brave. And then I think it needs to be brave. I think what the Commission's president and the new Commissioner for Enlargement have showed since December is that one can be brave. Both Ursula von der Leyen spoke about concrete dates for Ukraine and Moldova. Commissioner Koss spoke about concrete dates for preparing the countries. But also Commissioner Koss has been speaking more clearly on what's the situation in Serbia. She has also been reaching out to those who have not been spoken to and heard by. the previous commissioner for EU enlargement. And I think what we've seen in the community of the observers, but also in the public in Serbia, but also in the region, is that very quickly EU can regain the energy. Very quickly EU can become a positive actor in the region. Of course, everyone is cynical a bit. Everyone is skeptical. To what extent is Commissioner Koss serious? To what extent will she have the backing from Berlin and Paris? To what extent all these things are more on a more permanent basis? But I think what she and partly also President von der Leyen, with not having a press conference after the last meeting with President Vučić, with having the tweet that she had, how quickly she and the EU put itself in Serbia, but also in the region, in a more positive and more proactive way, shows that it's possible. But I think one needs to understand that, and one needs to have a bit more confidence, and one needs to have backing from the member states. And in that sense, I really do hope that Berlin will show that it can, to great extent, work together with the new commissioner and on the agenda, both for Serbia individually, as Manuel spoke, but also for some other countries. For me, it's clear we haven't heard a single word since their appointment from neither foreign minister nor the Europe minister, and we can only speculate. But what I've heard from the foreign minister on Hungary, for example, is quite interesting and might point to the approach also to Serbia, but to the other actors in the region as well. The coalition agreement has a lot of on how the EU needs to change its approach to member states who are threatening the interests of the EU, who are not working on the rule of law, who are not working on democracy. And when the foreign minister Valbona was asked about what does that mean practically, he said, well, Budapest and Hungary historically very important for Germany for the reunification and everything else. And we will extend our hands to Budapest, but we expect that Budapest will then react to that hand positively. And I would say that possibly we might see from this government as well, when it comes to Serbia, but also some other actors in the region, that yes, we might see again a reach out of the hand, communication, conversation, but that in the end, both Belgrade and the other actors in the region would need to deliver. How sustainable that will be also will depend on these decisions of the supporting the EU enlargement policy, but also supporting some of the other both narrative but also activities of Brussels that have been ongoing for the past couple of months.
Thanks, Adi. Last quick words. We're running over time. Vukosava, please.
Well, quick points. We desperately need brave EU, brave Berlin, brave Paris. We need you. Serbia is again, I would say, a country of political prisoners, and we must not forget that. What we heard from Commissioner Koss are different, messages. It's something that we want to hear, and as I said, previously, we can't expect over the night the change. So we need consistent and constant and continuous brave messages from the EU. And I believe EU is capable for that. And, foreign policy and EU integration processes has for decades been privatized by President Vučić, who goes to Moscow while students run to Brussels. So it's time to cut that. Thank you.
Thanks, Vukosava. Manuel.
Yeah. I think you can also send your energy minister to negotiate a gas deal or do it via phone. It is clear that the Russians wanted somebody at the square because not many showed up. Not every country just recently having a gas contract came, only some. So I think something has been given, and this was like the next part of it. We give a lot of cash to Serbia through the growth plan, also bilaterally. So we should perhaps see that. Like, if it's for money reasons, for the gas price or conditions of a treaty that I have to go to Moscow, why do we pay? Yeah. In the energy crisis, we saved apps by giving a grant of 100 million, if I remember right. Yeah, so I mean, like, if it's for money, then okay. It's not for money, I'm sure. Our friend in Belgrade is clever enough to know that for business, for money, for success, for trade, even for geopolitics, Russia is not an option. So we shouldn't treat him like being so naive that he really believes, we believe that Russia is his option. You see what happens to countries who are only opting for Russia. Just look to our friends in Yerevan, yeah? He's not going to rely only on Russia. So we don't have to be afraid that he would be so stupid to just rely on Russia, except his path is completely different from ours, or will be. Yeah, this will be seen, and I think, to be so frank, for these big questions, where develop Serbia, the question of the role of the US is very, very relevant. Because in the scenario that Serbia will domestically develop wrongly, of course, the withdrawal of the US is relevant, because EU will be not anymore the argument which will be like used domestically for a certain time. Yeah. And this is what I fear. If like the West, so to say, West is split, and then bad things happen, not regarding a war or conflict at first hand, but regarding the domestic situation in Serbia, which I don't know if it will happen, but it's a scenario that it might, then I think it will be very dangerous. And if this happens, of course, it would have then also relevant repercussions on the region. So I think holding up democracy is where the EU has to be brave.
Thank you, Manuel. Valbona.
Well, my final comment is that, I mean, the narrative has to change. The Western Balkans, with all the crises that we have in the world, and European Union has turned into, I mean, the security environment from a ring of friends to a ring of fire everywhere. I think the perception needs to change, that the Western Balkans is not anymore the backyard, but is the front yard of the European Union. And if we don't have that understanding, I think it will be difficult to have a different, to keep dealing with the same issues in the same way and expect, different results. So I think that's the basis of the understanding that this is important for the security of the European Union, but also because the crisis or the issues that we have in the region are resolvable. So I believe that for the EU, that will be also somehow low-hanging fruit to show that the EU is really the geopolitical actor. We have the geopolitical commission in Brussels. And then the third point that I mentioned from the very beginning is that I believe that when it comes to transatlantic and the role of the US in the region, it all depends on the transatlantic relations. So stronger and better deals and better transatlantic relations, strengthening we see in the future, that will be also important for the Western Balkans. I don't see that the Western Balkans will be separate from the overall transatlantic relations.
Thank you. I think these are some very good pointers we've heard here. Key points is the US is clearly withdrawing. It was even withdrawing before Trump, I mean, in many ways. I mean, not as rapidly, not as drastically, but it was less engaged than a decade ago. The EU has a role to step in here. I think we've heard terms as braver, more courageous, but also needs to regain the trust, needs to learn from the toolkit, which is no longer available now, which the US has provided in the region, and how the EU and its member states can fill it in. The observation that it will be very much up to the transatlantic relationship, how the US will be or not be present in the region. And of course, whether the Trump administration will be playing a role in the region, which might be disruptive rather than constructive. We don't know yet, but there's certainly the possibility, and the EU has to be prepared for it rather than waiting for it to happen. So clear role and reflection are necessary and part of the European Union, the German government and other governments, how to take over that role. So thanks to all of you, to Peter, Vukosava, Adi, Manuel, Valbona, from joining from many places, to our panel tonight. And well, we'll have to watch this space, of course. And thank you all for listening. Bye-bye.